the people who are benefiting are not the same people as those who lost.
That's Mike Wilkinson, a reporter at Bridge Magazine. He's our guest on this bonus edition of Your Daily Detroit podcast for Friday, June 14th, 2019. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Mortgages are on the rise in Detroit, but the proportion going to black people is on the decline. That's despite black people making up nearly 80% of the city's population. Just under half of all mortgages are now being written for white people, despite being just 10% of the population. That's according to a new report in Bridge Magazine that offers a fascinating portrait of how Detroit is changing. Joining us today in the Podcast Detroit studio at the Detroit Shipping Company is Mike Wilkinson. He's the staff writer for Bridge Magazine who reported this story. Mike, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Good morning. Hello.
Thanks for coming by. All right, so this is a fascinating piece, really well done, and there's a lot to kind of chew over here, a lot of different storylines to pull apart here. But I mean, let's start kind of high level. I guess this is sort of the rosy view, but mortgage activity is back on the upswing in Detroit after being down for years and nearly, dissipating completely during the mortgage crisis, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the growth in mortgage lending in the city, it's up almost 5 times from where it was in 2010, 2011. The downside of that is it was so low in 2010, 2011 because of the recession and the foreclosures. At the height, at the very tail end of the really big swing of investment in home purchases in Detroit in 2007, there were 3,700 mortgages that were issued. Mm-hmm. That fell all the way down to just around 200 at the bottom. It was just, there was not much investment at all. Now it's climbed to where we're up in 2017, the data we have, it was at just a little under 1,000. And I know from other sources that 2018 showed another increase. Mm-hmm. So there are people coming in there. They're buying homes, they're buying lofts, they are buying real estate and living in it.
You took a deep dive into the numbers, and it really showed a fascinating portrait of kind of demographics and racial composition of the city. So who is buying mortgages now in Detroit?
Well, right now, even though they are only 10% of the population, whites have received just a little under half of the mortgages in 2017, but over half of the money. So they're buying the larger homes across the city, and it's in really specific places. It's East English Village, it's Indian Village, it is the Midtown and downtown, the condos, University District. That's driving that particular part of the market. The African-American population is getting about half the loans, but only a third of the dollars for the homes that they're buying. Part of that is born out of just the absolute collapse of the market in on parts of the west and east side. There are still sales, but it's cash sales. You're not, the Bank of America isn't giving someone a $20,000 loan typically to buy a home in Brightmoor. That's just not happening.
And your reporting obviously doesn't account for cash sales. That's not necessarily...
No, it does not. And I talked to someone from Detroit Home Mortgage, which is a kind of a city initiated program, working with some banks to find ways to improve the mortgage market and help people. Krista Pate said that 26% of the sales are mortgage sales in the city, and the rest, 74%, are cash sales. Yeah, which I think in most any other community it's the reverse. Maybe it's 90-10 or 95-5.
Right. So Detroit remains, as of 2017 estimates, about 4/5 black. Absolutely. Yes. So what's happening with are they being denied mortgages, or what's going on with black homeowners?
Well, that's one of the fascinating things. And when I first looked and I saw that number, I said, wow, they're getting denied. Maybe, there's some redlining. And there still could be. The data is not rich enough to give us the complete details on the reasons for their denials. We don't know, the cash to debt load that they have, or the income to debt load that they have. We don't know their credit score. But back in 2007, if you look at the 4 counties of Metro Detroit that we looked at, Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, and Washtenaw, over half of the loan applications before denials were for homes in Detroit. So African-Americans—
This is
2007. So over half the time that they applied for a home loan, it was for a home in Detroit. By the time you get to 2017, it's just 14% of all applications. So they are opting to go to Redford, Southfield, Warren, Farmington Hills, and that's the silver lining is they are getting loans. They are the denial rate in the suburbs is lower than it is in the city. Again, that could be, there's a lot of factors there, but they are buying homes all across the region in places you weren't seeing in 2007. Parts of central Macomb County, which had not been exactly the most diverse places in Metro Detroit, but. So that's the silver lining, is that they are getting loans. And when you talk to people, as I have talked to them, they're going for the same reasons that the black middle class left in the 90s and whites left in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. They're saying schools. It's about safety. It's about amenities. It's about, high insurance, both home and auto in Detroit. So their reasons are very, to them, very legitimate, very personal, that they want the best value for their dollar.
It strikes me looking at this data, and I encourage people to go to Bridge, Michigan and look at this report. We'll have a link in the show notes. It strikes me just how little activity there really is. Although it's on the upswing, you think about where those things are. They're extremely focused in specific neighborhoods. And when I think about home sales, I think about mortgages are the ways that most families, most average folks are attaining a home. Because a cash sale often is an investor, or it's somebody who is trying to flip a home. Whereas a mortgage often is a family. And to me, I feel like for a city of our population, of our size, it's still really an indicator of how much economic growth we need to do to get to some semblance of normalcy.
So there's, in 2017, almost 1,000 mortgages. Well, in 2017, there were 1,500 or 1,600 people, black people, got a mortgage in Redford Township, which is what? 36 square miles versus 140 square miles. 2,100 families, black families, bought a home in Southfield. So it just is kind of shocking, to your point, that there is so little activity. You can look downtown to Midtown, you can look out the windows here, and you can see things are going on. But yes, someone who's making that investment that for the next 30 years, I'm going to write a check to this bank because I want to live here. That has not happened as often as it has elsewhere, although it is going up, and that is a positive sign.
You mentioned those handfuls of neighborhoods, Boston Edison, University District, Indian Village, et cetera. Got a fascinating chart in the story that shows the proportion of mortgages written to black and white homeowners, 2007 versus 2017, really kind of hammering home that shift. University District, where, we often record this show, in 2007 was 72% blacks, 25% whites for mortgages. Out of 68 mortgages in 2017, 97 mortgages written, nearly evenly split, 51.5% for black, 45.4% for white people. It's really interesting what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think what kind of frustrates some people in the African-American community, I talked to some realtors, and they all brought it up that there was so much lost wealth when the recession hit, and the foreclosures just took so much money out of the real estate market, which for a lot of people, that's their biggest chunk of their wealth is, how much equity do you have in your home? So there were people, I talked to someone, who lived in the University District who had bought a home 20 years ago for over $300,000. She didn't sell, but at the trough, that home was probably worth $60,000, $80,000, $90,000. And there were neighbors who did sell, so they lost all that wealth. Mm-hmm. And the people who are reacquiring that wealth are largely people who don't look like the people who sold the home. So the loser was maybe the African-American family, and the winner is either the speculator who's the bridge, or it's the white family who perhaps bought it 5 years ago at $200, and now it's worth $300, $400. And that kind of frustrates people because the people who are benefiting are not the same people as those who lost.
Yeah, absolutely. One sort of devil's advocate argument, though, is that, Detroit, for a long time, frankly, has become sort of racially homogenous, like non-diverse in the Absolutely. Opposite way. It's I think at one point we were almost 90% black, if I remember correctly. I could be off a little bit there, but most cities considered healthy are a much more, diverse mix of races. So isn't this a good thing that more white people are coming back into Detroit? What do people say that? Do you hear that? And
the only frustration I heard was about the wealth and lost wealth and who's gaining it. It is positive that African Americans are feeling comfortable to move into the suburbs in places where they did not want to go before. Mm-hmm. there's a fear that if they do move up there, we'll end up resegregating. I mean, Southfield is now majority black by a great deal. And then at that point, did we just move the problem 10, 15 miles to the north or to the east or to the west? That is a concern. The university district, the percentage African American has changed. It's gone down a little bit. It is tough. I mean, systematically, African Americans have been screwed in the housing market for decades.
Right.
By the government who set up that just by the nature of someone's skin said this was an undesirable area. That was in the 30s and the 40s. It continued until the Fair Housing Act in the 60s, and just ad hoc. I think it continued for many years after that. And then here you have the predatory loans coming in, where they were targeting these people for instruments that were ultimately the reason they had to get out of the house. So is it a good thing? Yes, but you can see that frustration that, well, wait a minute, the whole system has been rigged against us for decades.
Well, one thing I would add to that, and just context, I think a lot of times here in Detroit and Metro Detroit, we think of ourselves as a unique snowflake. But although the problems were exacerbated here in Detroit, across the nation, we have had issues of inequality and access to wealth and people of color losing wealth. I was having a conversation with one of the foundation groups that's very involved in the community, and they share with me an interesting statistic. Apparently, there's only like one city in Georgia, like a small suburban city, where income went up, but it didn't turn whiter. Like across the nation, when places do better economically, they turn whiter. And that's a kind of terrifying statistic and really speaks to the racial inequality in our country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the word gentrification is used a lot, and I hesitate to use it in Detroit because, I saw it when I lived in Chicago, where people would be moved out as the block after block would be improved and then, sold to, or rented to white folks, and there's another group that had to find a new place to live. I'm not sure we're seeing that completely in Detroit. One of the reasons we did this story was the New York Times and its Upshot did this fascinating look at how so many central city neighborhoods were becoming whiter from exactly what you're talking about. And there's this video from Raleigh that is just stunning in that piece that shows the 100-year-old wood frame bungalow, African-American family, somewhat well-kept. And then the next house is a modern steel-clad two-story building with a BMW in the driveway. Then the next house is another wood frame home, and the next one's wood frame, and then another modern house. And what they're experiencing is the value of that land was so low. Why? Because of all the factors we mentioned before, the segregation and the lack of opportunities. That now they're coming in. Now, is that neighborhood ever going to be diverse, or is it just going to suddenly, everyone's going to have a modern house and all those bungalows are gone? I don't know.
I know the data doesn't really dive into this, and I'm going to share my own personal experience from having lived in an area north of Corktown, having lived in Midtown and the University District over the last 7+ years. And what I've noticed is that the neighborhoods have changed and people who've moved in general, it doesn't feel like, and just talking to people like, where are you from? Hey, welcome. It doesn't feel like these are folks from Metro Detroit that are moving into greater downtown. You've got it's people from Brooklyn, from San Francisco, from wherever that are selling a loft or a small place out there for $500,000, $1 million, coming here to Detroit, propping up the prices because to them, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 is nothing. When you sold, you're getting a huge trade in your favor when you move to Detroit from those other areas. And I wonder how much that's really affecting how things are changing down here and that speed of change. Because, to me, people who live in Metro Detroit, if you look at the median home income of Michigan, things like that, they can't afford to live in these places that are being built down here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and one of the people I talked to for my story, born and raised in Detroit, bought her first home in Detroit, lost it because a crime wave hit her street up near Russell Woods. The value plummeted and she had to walk away from it. So she took obviously a huge hit financially and on her credit. But when she and her husband were wanting to buy a place again in 2014, the places that she wanted in Detroit, she was just priced out of. So they ended up buying a condo in Canton. She wanted, a condo. They didn't want a yard. but these lofts down here it was just too much money.
Yeah.
And so again, now your desire is to come in Detroit, but what you want, the inventory is not there. So now you have to choose the suburbs. It is kind of interesting, but the phenomenon you talk about, I think is, been seen in other places in the country. What its impact long term here in Detroit is. I mean, if it ends up pricing out people, I don't know where we're going to go.
Yeah, I mean, and I was thinking about this story and as I was coming down here today and thinking about my own experience. I mean, I used to live in Detroit as well, not too far from here, over in the Woodbridge neighborhood, and this was back in the 2000s. At one point, my wife and I were talking seriously about when it came time to buy a house, we might buy in the city. We ultimately opted against it for the same reasons everybody else does, right? I mean, there was a crime wave that hit our street. You could sense that the economy we were starting to head. This was a little bit before the Great Recession, but you could tell that the economy was starting to nosedive a little bit. Crime was coming in, and car insurance was a huge issue, and so we didn't. I mean, and I often think about this with all the Jared, what you're talking about with people moving here from Brooklyn and Austin, Texas, or wherever. I think that the people get here and they think, wow, this city is fascinating. It's great. It's so much fun. And it is. But I also I see a pattern with a lot of people that people have that initial enthusiasm. They're here for a while, and then they realize how big some of these problems are. And eventually, the luster wears off and they hit town. I mean, it suggests that Detroit this is like another sort of outline of all the endemic problems that Detroit has that we need to fix in the city in order to stabilize population loss and grow the city again.
Yeah, I would love to do a poll all those people from all those other places and poll it knowing how long have you been here.
Yeah.
Here's the poll of the people who have been here 6 months. Here's the poll of the people who've been here a year, because I think you're right. I mean, I'd love to see the changes. I drive around the city for my job sometimes, going to our office, which is in Midtown. And some days I'm like, wow, this is really going great. You drive around downtown, a little bit farther east. I was just over by Milano's Bakery in Eastern Market the other day, and like, wow, okay, this is really expanding. And then trying to get on the highway, I have to go through a neighborhood that I've never gone through before, and every house is boarded up or burned.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
a few blocks from Eastern Market, it gets desolate.
And what was the Google executive who was in town the other day, just extolling the virtues. I'm like, did you go a mile in any direction beyond the 7.2? Did you take, and the answer is clearly no.
Yeah.
Because, or if you did, you didn't want to talk about it. These problems that the city has are huge, and I'm very hopeful that what the growth that we have seen is going to continue, but the problems are just daunting.
All right. Well, Mike Wilkinson, it's a fascinating story. We will link to it. You can find it on Bridge Magazine. But great work, and thanks so much for coming in and talking with us about it.
Thanks. I had a great time.
Well, that's our show for today. Before we let you go, wanted to let you know that Daily Detroit is made possible by support from our listeners. If you value smart discussions like these that push Detroit's conversation forward, consider becoming a Patreon member.
That's right. For as little as $1 a month, you can get cool Daily Detroit stickers with the cool shield and everything, and assure that we can keep providing great episodes like this one. Visit patreon.com/dailydetroit, and thanks. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jared Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.